This video introduces you to a couple of important journals and the organizations that run them. It's full of opportunities available to you, students and young scholars interested in economics and the space beyond the mainstream economics curriculum. So make a few notes and have your calendar ready. I've lined up 3 interviews with representatives of these organizations. So we are joined now by Dr. Greitner Rotkovich. Thanks so much for coming to join us today. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
So you're involved with the Association for Evolutionary Economics, where you've recently won that Claire Ayres Award. You're also involved with the European Association for Evolutionary Political Economy. But give us a quick intro. Who are you and what is your research interests?
So I'm Claudius. I'm assistant professor of pluralist economics at the Europa University in Flensburg, which is in Germany, directly to the Danish border. And I'm also a research associate at the Johannes Kepler University, at the Institute for Comprehensive Analysis of the Economy. Yeah, and my research interests, so on the one hand, I have this more applied research I'm doing on development, technological change. I'm particularly interested in socio-ecological transformations and especially the relevance of institutions and institutional change that's necessary to make these transformations fair, because they usually come with a lot of potential conflicts, with a lot of potential redistribution. And I mean, sometimes that can be a chance, sometimes it can be a challenge, and I'm trying to figure out, okay, who's actually winning, who's losing, and how we can adjust institutions to make it more fair also on a global scale, and how to handle these transformation conflicts to make these transformations feasible in the first place. And there I'm particularly interested in these global interdependencies. And then I have this more philosophical arc of my research where I'm interested in the philosophy of science, of how we generate knowledge about the real world in economics, and especially on this topic of pluralism. Like, what is pluralism? What are the challenges? What are the chances? The pros and cons, but also the state of plurality in economics and related social science. One thing I'm particularly working on in the past has been the relationship between pluralism and post-colonial thought, which I think has been gaining more and more relevance, and I think that's pretty good. And I think it's interesting to ask yourself, okay, what's actually the relationship between post-colonial thought and pluralism, and also these ideas of, on the one hand, pluralizing economics, on the other hand, decolonizing economics. When are they complementary? When are they in conflict? How can we handle that to make economics more inclusive, more applicable to these pressing real world problems we're facing?
So what you touch on there is really interesting. And you're, of course, running a special forthcoming issue on this topic. And students might remember you from the Exploring Economics Summer School, where you introduced a group to complexity economics and modeling methods and Python. And some of your teaching material is also available on YouTube. You're teaching on modeling and R. And I think many of these methods might potentially give us a way to represent some of the concepts in evolutionary political economy. Maybe on that note, give us an overview of the European Association for Evolutionary Political Economy and the Association for Evolutionary Economics, because I think there's a lot to unpack with these 2 organizations.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. So the AFFE, the Association for Evolutionary Economics, is an US-based organization, and it's the older one of the 2. It is today very established institution. They are very firmly based, especially in the US system. So if you're working on evolutionary economics, you're most probably familiar with this organization, or you're even attending their meetings, publishing in their journals. So it's a very strong organization already with a lot of history. They have a journal, the Journal of Economic Issues, which is among the most prominent heterodox economics journals. I think a lot of the debate about institutional economics is happening within this journal, not exclusively, but it's really important. And I think this journal is one of the many reasons of also the strength of this organization. They as the journal is very prominent, they also have a strong position in relation to their publisher, which allows them to do a lot of interesting things and also to support other heterodox associations, especially in the US. So they are, for example, funding sessions at other organizations, and they are helping them out with a lot of stuff. It is an organization that is, I would say, a little bit more focused on one particular school of thought, evolutionary economics, although this, I think, school of thought is heterogeneous in itself. And the AFFE is, I think, handling all these different branches within this school of thought very well. And then the EP is the European Association for Evolutionary Political Economy. And it was founded by a lot of people that were heavily influenced by AFFE. So at the time when EP was funded a couple of decades ago, AFFE was already there. It has a very important position. And many of the people who were founding EP were actually also members of AFFE, and they were traveling through the US. And then they thought, okay, hey, we need to set up something similar in Europe. And this is actually how EP was founded a couple of decades ago. And as of today, I would say that EP is a more diverse organization. If you go to the annual conference, there are many different schools of thought, many different research communities basically using this conference as their annual conference. So it's less focused on one particular school of thought, but it's a little bit broader. But they have very strong relations. There are also AFFE sponsored sessions at EP. Many EP members are coming to the AFFE. And the EP has so far two journals. They have been involved in the Journal of Institutional Economics, which is now very prominent also in more, I would say, also in more mainstream circles, has a very good ranking. But the main journal of EP has been the Review of Evolutionary Political Economy, which has been founded a couple of years ago only. So it's a smaller journal so far. But it is now also part of some rankings like Scopus, which is very important for many scholars in especially in the UK, but also other countries in Europe. So that their research that they publish there is counted for their careers as well. And it's also a more pluralist journal as compared to the GEI. So it invites contributions from different schools of thought, and it's particularly open also to the contributions of young scholars. So I hope this somehow gives you an overview of the two organizations. With the EP, the younger European version of the AFFE, so to speak, although it's probably better to not speak that out loudly.
Yeah, that's a great overview. And so we have the Journal of Economic Issues, and that one is associated with FE. And then we have
Exactly.
the Review of Evolutionary Political Economy, and that one is associated with
EP, exactly.
AP. Yes, and I've read a lot about that journal. I know that it is going places. It's still a young journal, and
Yes.
their future looks pretty bright. Now, tell us about the special issue that you're currently running with them.
Yeah, that's the nice thing about REPI also being a younger journal because you can set up these things rather quickly. So we together with a colleague from the University of Erfurt, Oliver Kessler, and one of his colleagues, we were starting to organize special sessions at the annual conference of the EP about the relationship between post-colonial thought, post-colonial scholarship on the one hand, and heterodox and pluralist economics on the other hand. Because we felt that this topic is super relevant for a variety of different schools of thought in economics, but a lot of the discourses are happening elsewhere, like international political economy and related fields. At the same time, a lot of debate about decoloniality, postcoloniality, etc., involves economic issues. So we think that especially heterodox economics would have a lot to contribute to these debates. So we organized these special sessions where we invited people from all these different fields to set up a space where they could have a constructive conversation. And we've been doing that for a couple of years now, and we found the conversations very interesting. So we wanted to set up also a place in a journal where these people could publish this research and where it is published in the same place. So where we as readers could then go and see, okay, hey, what's the current state of this debate? Also, if we're not so much into this topic yet, when we just want to know, okay, hey, what's pluralism and post-coloniality, what it's actually about. Yeah? So we can have a look at that special session. And that's what we're currently setting it up. We have some special sessions at EP this year as well. But like if you're hearing that and you definitely want to contribute, you can still do that without attending the annual conference because we have this open call, which is open until October 15. And we invite people to submit their abstracts. And then we will have a look at the abstracts and think about, okay, what could be a good combination of abstracts to give readers a nice overview over the field. And
Yeah.
with that, we try to like put pluralism a little bit into practice and to give post-colonial scholarship also a space in this whole conversation.
Mm. Okay, so you mentioned how the idea for this special issue came from the sessions discussing the relationship between pluralism, the different schools of thought on the one hand, and post-colonial scholarship on the other. And this debate is probably noticeable in every university with a Department of Pluralist Economics or Department of Political Economy, as we call it in Australia. Even at my own university, I've recently attended a paper session presented by one of the lecturers exploring this topic as it relates to teaching. That paper is actually in a forthcoming issue of the Journal of Australian Political Economy, as well as my own paper in that journal about rethinking economics work in Australia. That journal is also running a special issue about teaching political economy, where this debate will no doubt arise. But I think uh, I have the most important question for you now, and that is how do students and young scholars get involved with EP and FE? What opportunities are there for them?
Good question. I think it's important to stress that both of these organizations are very keen to invite young scholars to their events. They do it in different ways, but as a young scholar, I think going to either of these organizations is a very good idea. So when it comes to the AFFE, what immediately comes to my mind, they are setting up a summer school, which I think is very nice when you're located in the US or somewhere close, because it's very good to get to know other people. It's a very friendly environment with great speakers. Um, when you want to just get to know about what people are working on, I think going to the annual conference that happens in the context of the ASSA in early January, going there is a very good idea. They are also setting up new programs for young scholars. So, for example, if you want to present a poster at the ASSA, then AFFE is now sponsoring a poster prize for people doing work in the area of institutionalist
Oh,
economics.
amazing.
And they some people, Jeff Schneider, for example, who has been a long member of AFFE, he's also organizing the ICAPE, which is basically a conference on pluralism that usually takes place either directly before or after the ASSA meetings. So it's a very nice, very friendly, a little bit more informal place to be and to make more connections to other institutionalists and heterodox scholars. And it's particularly open to young scholars. So that's really a very nice way to go. If you want to know more about what they're doing, I think the website is a good place. There's also a Google group, and they also have a blog on their website. So I think that's a good way to look at that. When it comes to the EP, I think also going to the website is a good idea. They are setting up a lot of new programs right now. So they have the mentoring program, where young scholars are basically matched based on their interest with more established economists in their field. So to get a little bit advice about career, publishing, also content feedback, etc. They have a pre-conference, which is a pretty cool event. It takes place 1 or 2 days before the actual main conference of the EP. And the idea is that, especially when you don't know anybody there, you're coming to the pre-conference, you get some joint lectures, you have an evening program where you also meet the council. So it's very, very friendly, nice environment. It's great if you want to get into that community. And then when you go to the annual conference directly afterwards, you already know a lot of people. So that's nice. They also have the Simon Prize. So if you have your paper at the conference, you can get an award. And all this, I think, is also written on the newsletter.
Okay, wonderful. I think many people will be very excited for all of these that you just mentioned. Thank you very much, Claudius. It's been an honor to talk to you. Good luck with all of these things that you're involved with, and we'll speak soon.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you.
Hello, Dr. Thornton. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Hi, Dan. It's great to be here.
So, before we get into the Journal of Australian Political Economy, could you introduce yourself and tell us about your connection to the journal?
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So I'm Dr. Tim Thornton. I'm director of the School of Political Economy, which is based in Melbourne but has a global cohort of students.
Hmm.
It was an organisation I set up in 2019 when I sort of reached the conclusion that because a lot of universities are so reluctant to embrace any sort of reformed economics curriculum, that there was a good case for simply going off the grid and teaching kind of university level courses outside the system where you won't get blocked and you can simply do it properly, and also at much lower cost. And so that's the main thing I've been doing. But I'm also affiliated with the Economics in Context initiative at Boston University, which creates curriculum material and is also an important actor in the reform space, as well as a research fellow with the Global Development and Environment Institute at Tufts University, which also does a lot in the economics curriculum reform space. Um, uh, and so, yeah, that's me. And in terms of how I came to be involved in the journal, I've had a long-term connection with Frank Stilwell, such a founding figure of political economy at Sydney University, and he has always been a very supportive and indeed inspiring figure since I've been doing my way back to my PhD. And so he invited me, and I was very honoured to become part of the editorial team, or I think the editorial collective as it's known.
Okay, amazing. So, when was the journal originally founded, and what type of articles does it usually publish?
Yeah, look, the journal was founded in 1977. I think it's in its 94th issue now, so it's had a it's really going quite well, and it was just felt at the time that political economy in Australia needed its own sort of house journal, and also the idea was to have an academic journal to academic standards, but also kind of accessible language, not overly technical, and to address itself to problems in the Australian economy, looking at problems within the orthodox economic framework, looking at critiques of economic systems and how things can be done better. So it's got the, I guess, charter of any good political economy journal with a distinctly Australian focus, notwithstanding the fact that it often has articles in there that speak to anybody anywhere in the world that's interested in political economy.
Uh-huh, yeah. And tell us a bit about the journal's connection to this time in the 1970s, where we've got this interesting struggle for an alternative economics at the University of Sydney. It's such an interesting.
So yes, like really, the journal kind of emerges out of a larger conflict over the teaching of economics at Sydney University that's went for at least 40 years. That really involved the Department of Economics being split into two departments, a Department of Political Economy and a more conventional Department of Economics. And so this is, something of, it's an epic struggle. Like it has its own literature. There's been a book written about it, various journal articles. Maybe they should make a mini series or a Lord of the Rings type movie.
Yeah, our next
Like
project.
certainly there's the drama of it, and just that determination to do something really quite reasonable, which is really just to adopt a pluralistic way of teaching where you look at more than one framework and you look at everything critically. Like, who would have thought doing such an eminently reasonable thing would encounter such resistance? But it did. And the only way they could resolve it in the end, or the only sort of really kind of stable resolution, was to set up a different department. And personally, I think that actually that offers a template that many other universities should or could possibly be contemplating, rather than continually trying to sort of reason with orthodox economists who are often, because of some type of mental rigidity or other reasons, unable to sort of be persuaded to what's a very reasonable case in terms of teaching.
For sure. And we ended up with one of the most distinctive political economy programs in the world and Australia's top political economy journal. So how do people get access to the journal articles?
Yeah, look, the great thing about Journal of Australian Political Economy is it's open access. You can subscribe, and I think there's a very sporting rate for students. I can't remember. It's so you can get a hard copy, but and so great if you can do that. But what I can leave you to do, like if you insert a link, I think it's just ppesydney.net/JAPE-issues, but that can go up, and then you can access all 94 editions. You can search back issues, you can kind of text search. It's a great resource, and again, even though there's an Australian regular Australian focus there, it's more general than that, and it's really one of the really good global journals in political economy.
Mm-hmm. And could you tell us about the JAPE Young Scholars Award?
Yeah, look, the JAPE, or Journal of Australian Political Economy, has a Young Scholar Award where you can actually, if you do a good piece of work, you submit it in a competitive process, you can get $1,000. And then if you can then develop that for publication in the journal or perhaps some other journal, then there's another $1,000. So it's a sort of $2,000 prize. And really, the editorial team, like particularly Frank, always encouraging of young scholars. He was very encouraging of me when I was a younger fella, and that's extremely important. And so, yeah, people should start thinking that. I remember when I was doing my master's, I'd never thought of publishing anything anywhere, and I happened to know somebody that was a journal editor and said, "Oh, gee, maybe you should submit that one of your chapters," and lo and behold, and then I got into it and became an accidental academic. But it took that encouraging space, otherwise might never have done any of that. So it shows the importance of fostering people's capabilities and also their confidence.
Thank you for sharing that. That would be very inspiring for our viewers. So yes, for our viewers, one of the articles in that latest issue is by the winner of that Young Scholars Award. That's the one by Zach Edwards on water marketization. And I also saw one of your own articles in the latest issue, Dr. Thornton. For those who might be interested, could you explain what the main takeaways are and what inspired you to write that article?
Yeah, look, it's a good example of how JAPE publishes stuff that should be of interest to anybody, and it's looking at the relationship between economic growth and environment. And so this has been a very contested issue for at least 5 decades or more. And what I argue, it's misconceived. You've got these people that are anti-economic growth. You've got these people that are very pro-economic growth, but it's got to be green growth. And what I think is this is a false dualism. I think the literature's marked by surprising lack of precision and consistency. Sometimes looking through some of the literature, which is published in good journals, you think, oh God, this is like a MC Escher picture. This does not make sense. And so what I've tried to do is to say, put a more contingent position, saying it depends, like, again, this sounds really reasonable, but like it's not in the literature. And I kind of outline 5 or so factors that kind of mediate the relationship between economic growth and environment, and really encouraging people to say, look, if you're concerned about the environment or society, design policies to address those things directly. There may be some second order effects on the rate of economic growth, but there may not be. Those effects might be a problem, they might not. And so we can't really answer this question in general to say, oh, growth good or growth bad, because you've got to say, well, growth of what? We've got more coal mines or more solar panels? Have we got people selling fast fashion, or have we got people engaged in environmental remediation? the thing is, a lot of things that are accelerants of economic growth are actually environmentally beneficial, but they can also be harmful. And so the takeout of all of this is, look, if you're genuinely concerned about the environment or society, well, address those issues directly through good environmental policy, good social and economic policy. There may sometimes, not always, but sometimes be consequences on the rate of growth, and then sometimes those consequences might be seen as problematic. If so, you address those then.
Yeah, and it did make me think more about that relationship between growth and the environment. It's not just about should we have slower growth, steady growth, or degrowth, right? It's about the relationship between the options and the environment. Yeah, it broadened my perspective quite some.
Hopefully,
Mhm.
I've said something useful, because I kind of feel the debate in its current form is overly confusing, overly distracting, and most of all, overly divisive. That's really what we need to do is coalesce about sort of taking direct action on environmental resources, not sort of pontificating about rates of economic growth. And growth itself is a metric of enormous plasticity. And then, unsurprisingly, there's been some blowback from that by kind of established commentators in the field. And so that's there's the Progress in Political Economy blog, which is sort of related to the journal but distinct from it, where they've written a critique of the journal article, and then I've written a rejoinder to that, and then there's some comments, and so people can look at that if they like as well.
All right, perfect. So students can have a look at the Journal of Australian Political Economy and some of the interesting stuff happening there. Thanks so much, Dr. Thornton, for always being available to chat to us. We appreciate your time.
Well, thanks for the invitation. Great to speak with you, Dennis.
Professor Milmo, thanks for joining us on call today. It's nice to have you.
Thanks, Dennis.
Could you start by introducing yourself? Maybe tell us a bit about some of the interesting books or stuff you've been working on for those who don't know, and tell us about your relationship to the History of Economics Review.
Okay, thanks, Dennis. Well, my name's Alex Milmo. I'm the president of the History of Economic Thought Society of Australia, which is about 100 members in Australia dabbling in the history of economic thought. I myself, my specialization is in Australian economics. I did my PhD on Australia's introduction to Keynesian economics. I've written a few books on Australasian economic thought, that's Australia, New Zealand. I've also written a book on Colin Clark, the gypsy economist. He was a British Australian economist with a very magpie-like habit of dabbling in many fields. And I'm just currently now finishing off a history of the Economic Society of Australia. They're celebrating their 100th anniversary this year, and I was commissioned to write a history of the society, and I'm just basically fine proofing it and adding a little bit more detail, because when you write a book, it's never really finished.
Yes, of course.
You know, the great lament is, you know, you find something and you've already finished it, or it's got published, and you think, oh, geez, I wish I could have had that. But the reason why I'm doing that is, well, first of all, because I'm involved with the Economic Society in Australia. I'm the president of the Victoria branch here in Melbourne. So I wear sort of two hats. I'm a historian of economics. I'm not a theorist. I'm not an econometrician. I'm a sort of a wordsman, basically, a writer, more a historian than an economist, actually.
All right.
But I do dabble in Australian economics, both in 100 years ago and even up to today. I've just finished a conference recently in Perth, the HETSA conference every year. And before that, just the week before that, was the Australian Conference of Economists, which was the Economic Society's premier event. So both societies run conferences every year.
So yeah, you mentioned the ESA, and then
Yeah.
you're the president of HETSA, and it
Yes.
has an associated publication. So
Yes.
when was that founded, and what sort of articles does it publish?
The History of Economic Thought Society publishes this journal called the History of Economics Review. It was established way back in 1981, when the history of economics was quite a popular and a new subject. So that was, what, 40 odd years ago. It's probably had a rise and a fall since then. We still have about over 100 members in Australia. And it publishes all types of economics, heterodox, radical, Marxist, mainstream. It's an open church. It's a broad church. We don't have any ideological leanings, either one way or the other. We're just into the history of economics, the history of economic philosophy. And we welcome it. My specialization, as I said, is in Australian economics. Other people specialize in Adam Smith, which is always very popular, Marx, Ricardo, institutionalism, behavioralism. You're talking here about computerization economics or game theory, modeling, etc. We've had articles on the history of econometrics. So we're a broad church, the HETSA Society. We publish the HER 3 times a year, and we're always looking for submissions.
Good. I'll put a link of the website
Sure.
for students. But that sounds really interesting. Now, tell us, are there any resources that HETSA offers to scholars or students?
We have money in a deposit stock, which is just earning interest, and we're always prepared to mobilize some of that money to help a student to come to the conference, or particularly young students, because we know how hard up they are. And in fact, next year, the HETSA Society is going to have a conference in Japan with the Japanese Society of HET, and they're putting up $10,000 to help young Australian scholars travel to Japan, to Kyoto, to present. So I've got some money there to distribute, and if people are prepared to go to Japan and present there, we can do that.
Yes, I
But
remember.
we're not flush with funds. Even the economic society is not flush with funds. You know, they're better well off than we are. But at least for HETSA, we're happy to promote young students, young graduate students, young undergraduate students. If they want to do a honors thesis or a master's thesis or even a PhD in HET, we'll try and help them. We welcome young people. The thing about HETSA is that our demographic is getting older and older. Okay, so we want more young people to come and do a thesis in HET or a paper for that matter.
And then
Research
on the
article.
website, students can find some study opportunities across Australia that offers.
Yeah. The new website will have that information, and it's being developed as we speak. So stay tuned on that. It's quite a comprehensive website, all the study opportunities and possible supervisors around Australia that are willing to try and supervise you if you want to do a thesis or a paper on history of economics.
All right, perfect. Now, in the History of Economics Review, one of your recent articles reflects on the past century of economics in Australia. And you note the 2025 centenary of the Economic Society of Australia, the ESA. Now,
Yes.
could you share some key points from that article, or perhaps just tell us briefly about the history of the ESA?
Well, just the history of the Economic Society of Australia was founded in 1925, and essentially it was also Australia and New Zealand, but that proved to be impossible. So eventually New Zealand broke away and formed their own society. But they had a baptism of fire in 1925 because just 2 years later, a quartet of economists actually advised the federal government about tariff policy. And then in 1930-31, a quartet of economists, again, all society members, advised the federal government about the way out of the Great Depression and huge budget deficit, huge balance of payment deficit, huge foreign debt problem that Australia was in as a young nation. 31 years facing a threat to its integrity. In fact, Keynes in 1932 praised the Premier's plan, or what was called then the Economist plan, for having saved the economic structure of Australia from liquidation. Australia was in a difficult hole in the 1930s. Our exports of wool and wheat and dried fruit had all collapsed in price. We didn't have any minerals then. We were a primary producing exporting country, and we were caught short. We had borrowed so much money to finance infrastructure, and then we couldn't pay the interest and we couldn't pay the principal back to London. And so these four economists came up with a solution. It was an austerity solution. It was basically a deflationary solution, but it still saved the economic structure of Australia, according to John Maynard Keynes. And then towards the end of the 30s, it was preparing the case for war, prosecuting war, marshalling resources for the war effort. So the Economic Society came around just about the right time. And since then, it's sort of still been a viable, prestigious voice, but it's sort of faded away recently because there's so many other think tanks and lobby groups and opinion makers and economic journalists offering their advice, offering their input, offering their views on economic policy. But in the 1920s and the 30s, the society was, and its members was the only economic source of authority, basically. I mean, there wasn't a treasury. The central bank was quite weak, so it was economists in academia that was actually had the sword of the territory to themselves. And then when the Second World War came, the federal government began to recruit academic economists into the public service, and so the society began to sort of start this long eclipse. But it still was a very influential platform. It's economics is basically mainstream economics. It's not heterodox. It's not Marxist. I mean, they don't have many heterodox economists speaking at a branch meeting or writing in the Economic Record. The Economic Record is the journal's flagship journal, which also celebrates its 100th anniversary this year.
Okay, that's good to know. And then in that early history, even earlier, maybe the 1800s, I've read something interesting in your report about the word economist and about one of the first journals in economics. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, in the 1880s, there was a journal called the Australian Economist, which went out for about 10 years. It's more of sort of a newspaper thing, but someone actually came up with the word economist, and I found to my surprise that was the first time the word economist was used. Then it was political economy. Economists only came into vogue in the 1920s, in the 20th century. The Australian Economist, though, was sort of open to everyone, and there was quite a few women writing at that time, whereas it sort of faded away. Why it faded away, I'm not particularly sure. But then in the 1920s, the Economic Record came into being and the Economic Society came into being. And that was much more mainstream university type economics.
Women were banned back in some of the early days with the founding of the ESA.
Yeah.
Right.
The society, when it was first founded, some branches didn't accept women even coming to the branch meetings. It was only in sort of after the Second World War that they said, look, women should be admitted as associate members, whereas other branches like in Victoria and New South Wales, they allowed women members, but very few women were studying economics at the time. Anyway, that slowly liberalized, women became members, but only as the women started to do more economics. But the great irony about that is in the year 2025, that there are now, with the rise of Women in Economics Network, which is a new chapter in the Economic Society, there are 700 odd women economists now joining the society. And that's basically rejuvenated the society because it was actually declining in membership right up to 2017. It was in danger of actually slipping away into unconsciousness until the survival. We suddenly allowed it, people in charge of the society felt it was time to reach out to young people, more particularly women economists. And it's possibly saved the society from a terminal end.
Yes.
The other thing that happened in the last 30 years is that in the 1990s, economic degrees began to fall in popularity at all Australian universities. And again, that was another danger to the society, which the society has responded to by trying to offer more economic courses for teachers. The Reserve Bank of Australia has probably done more, though, to encourage economics at high school. Girls and boys to do economics and not to be scared off. And this Economic Society now offers refresher courses for teachers or to try and expose teachers to economic principles because of the lack of teachers actually trained in economics. I mean, that's still a problem because a lot of the lower socioeconomic regions or the outer suburbs, the regional towns, they don't offer economics because there are no economic teachers who can offer the subject. So there's the society, but also the RBA, the Reserve Bank, are trying to deal with that structural inbuilt problem.
Yeah. All right. Interesting information. Okay, I've got time for one last question.
Yeah.
Even internationally, a few famous folks like Joan Robinson contributed to the Economic Journal at one time,
Yeah.
but locally they were really successful. Um, they have some way of engaging the students and the different sectors of society, or why are they so popular?
Well, the Society in 2010 announced an eminent visitors program where they would fund worldwide celebrity economists like Joe Stiglitz to come here and do a lecture tour around all the capital cities. But most economists, international economists, have always come to the conference. Well, they get a special invite at the Conference of Economists. Even the HETSAs occasionally had a occasional guest speaker that we fly out, to sort of draw a crowd. And so we would subsidize that speaker to come out from Europe or America or Japan. And equally, the Economic Society still does that with every time they have a conference around the States, they always have some draw card speaker, cutting edge economics in mainstream economics, like game theory, like labor economics, behavioral economics. This society still does that. They've got more financial resources to do that than perhaps the History of Economics Society does. But that's the way. But a lot of economists come to Australia because they are attracted to here. They might come here for a holiday and then do a few occasional lectures, maybe even give a lecture at the Economic Society. The people who went to the conference of economists just last week in Sydney were mostly young public service economists or private sector NGO. 20% of the congregation were young academics, some from here, some from overseas. So the Economic Society today is no longer an academic society. It's basically more a public sector, or basically catering for all economists, but essentially public policy economists.
All right. Okay, perfect. So we covered HETSA and the ESA.
Yeah.
I encourage students to look out for the publication of that centennial history. This was a really interesting talk, Dr. Milmo. I thank you for your time. Thank you very much.
Pleasure, Dennis. I look forward to it.